Good to see you this morning. I'm going to get a little more comfortable if that's okay with you. This is probably the only time you'll ever see me in a full suit on a Sunday morning. So take your pictures. All right. Today we are talking about the state of the church. That's why we're here this morning. That's why I am dressed up for the occasion. So we're going to be talking about where are we now, right? What's the state of the church presently? But more importantly, where are we going? Right, where are we headed as a church? And so that's what we're going to be talking about this morning. About a month ago, we wrapped up a church-wide survey that we were conducting. Many of you participated in that. And so we've been kind of looking over all the feedback that you gave us, praying over what you guys said. And we noticed that there were two common concerns that were addressed in that survey. The first one was we need more growth. Right? If you look around, I mean, there's a lot of empty chairs here this morning. We have attendance seems to be up this morning, and that's just because we shut down Verb Kids today because we wanted everyone to hear what I'm going to be saying. And so, welcome, kids. Glad to have you in here with us this morning. But our attendance is always a bit low, and there's been this concern. Many of you brought it up in the survey that we just need growth. Right? Why isn't the church growing? And then another concern that many of you brought up was we need to do more outreach as a church, right? We need to get outside of our walls. We need to be doing more outreach in the community and ultimately living up to our name, the Verb Church, right? And so these were the two kind of all the feedback that we got, these were the two kind of common concerns that many of you brought up in that survey. And so today I want to address these concerns among some other stuff, and we're just going to talk about, like I said, what is the state of the church now, and then where are we headed as a church. Now, I want to preface this morning with a bit of scripture, if that's okay. It is church, so it better be okay. But I want to open up with some scripture. So if you want to turn to Matthew chapter 25, it's going to be a pretty good chunk of scripture. So if you want to follow along with me, Matthew chapter 25, we'll have it on the screen as well. This is a parable. Jesus tells this parable about the parable of the talents, right? And what we're going to see in this story is that this master gives three servants varying amounts of money, and we're going to see what they do with that money and then what the master's response is. And so Matthew chapter 25, we're going to start in verse 14. We're going to read down to verse 30. For it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also who had the 2 talents came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here I have made 2 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. But his master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown, and gather where I scatter no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was mine with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has will be given, and he will have an abundance. But for the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away away and cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now this morning I don't have time to unpack this parable in great detail. We'll have to save that for another day. But the gist of the story, what you see here is 3 servants are given money of varying amounts. And what's interesting is that each servant is given an amount according to their abilities, which is rather interesting. And we see that 2 of the servants invested the money. Right? They took the money and they traded with it and invested with it. So upon the master's return, they had extra money to give to the master. But one of the servants went and hid the money. Right? He was afraid that he might invest the money and lose it. Right? And so he decided just to play it safe, and he hid the money. And we see that when the master returns to the 2 servants that invested the money, he says, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a little, I will trust you with more." But to the servant who played it safe and who hid the money, it was taken away from him entirely. Right? And so the big question that many of us have is why is this church not growing? Right? Why has this church seemed to have stagnated? And the bottom line, if I were to be completely honest, is that we just have not been good stewards with what God has entrusted us with. And I want to make it very clear, when I say we, I'm including myself in that we. Right? This isn't finger pointing and blame throwing at all. In fact, I'm a huge part of that we. Right? I have not been a good steward with what God has entrusted with us. And just like this parable, how can we expect God to trust us with more if we can't even be faithful with the little that God's already entrusted us with? Right? And so this has been a huge area of conviction for me personally and for the staff and leadership of this church as well, that if we want God to grow this church, if we want God to give us more and to trust us with more, whether it's more people, whether it's more resources, or whether it's just more influence and impact in the community, right? Whatever it is, if we want God to give us more, which I think we all feel that, right? We want more for this church. But how can we expect God to give us more if we can't even be faithful with the little that He's already given us? Right? And so in the past, we have just not been good stewards, but this is no longer the case. Right? No longer are we going to be bad stewards of what God's given us. We are going to be good stewards of what God's given us. And we believe that the best is yet to come for this church. We truly believe that God has huge things in store for us. And I'm going to be talking about that this morning. And in order for us to receive what God has for us, we've got to be ready. Right? We've got to be ready to receive what God has. And He has some awesome things in store. So I'm excited about talking about that this morning. So today, we are about halfway through 2018, which is crazy, right? This is the end of June, so we're over halfway through 2018. So since we're halfway through the year, I figured what I would do is I just kind of want to recap the last 6 months, right? Recap the first half of 2018, kind of show you what has happened this last 6 months, where God has brought us as a church, and then we'll talk about the next 6 months and beyond. Right? So we're talking about where have we come from and where are we going. So first, I want to talk about where we have come from. Right? This is where we've come from, especially the last 6 months, to bring us to today. First, I want to kind of start out with a story, right? A story time. This is because I want to share with you a little bit about what God's done in my own heart in relation to just this church and what God's up to. If I were to be completely honest and candid with you, 6 months ago, I was unofficially done. Right? I was just at a point of frustration and disappointment and burnout, and I had essentially unofficially thrown in the towel. I was just at a point where I had just kind of given up. Right, I was frustrated and disappointed just with the church. The Verb Church is now a little over 5 years old, which is, again, crazy to think 5 years just flown by, right? And so the beginning of this year, we were approaching the 5-year anniversary mark, and we just weren't experiencing the growth that I had longed for. The church just, as a whole, just kind of felt stagnant and stale, and I was just frustrated. And I was, like I said, unofficially done. Right? In my heart, I had basically given up. And in the last 6 months, God has really done a revitalization in my heart. And today I have a new sense of vision and purpose and excitement for what God's doing. And if I were to be completely honest, today, and I'm not even being dramatic, today, I have clearer vision and more passion and excitement for the direction of this church than I did even 5 years ago when we first launched the church. My vision is clear. The passion and energy that I have and I see for this church is stronger now than it's ever been in 5 years. I am excited to see what God is up to. And there's two reasons for this, right? That this shift in my heart, what changed? Right? What brought about this renewed passion and vision for this church? Well, there were kind of two big catalysts, right? To make a long story short, there were two big catalysts to this shift in my heart over the last few months. And so I want to publicly give a shout out to Megan and Chase because a few months ago, they came to me just out of the blue and come to find out they were feeling the same kind of frustration and disappointment that I think most of us probably kind of feel, right? And they were feeling that as well. And they came to me just out of the blue, but it wasn't a coincidence, right? The timing was definitely God sent, right? And they came to me and just said, look, something needs to change, right? That this church just seems stagnant. We're not going anywhere. We got to do something, right? If we want to see this church be what God's called us to be, we got to do something. Right? And that kind of unleashed a series of events that has brought about the change, not only in my heart, but just in the church as a whole. So I want to publicly thank them just for their boldness in following God's call in that. And then another huge catalyst was Chase and I have been meeting regularly with a guy named James Brown, not the legendary singer James Brown, a different James Brown. But we've been meeting with this guy named James Brown. He's a pastor over at a church in McKinney called Anchor Church. Anchor Church is about 2.5, maybe almost 3 years old, and they're just exploding, right? I mean, they're exploding in numerical growth, but also just their church is just there's a vitality and a health in their organization. And so we've been meeting with James on a regular basis. Just he's kind of become a church consultant, if you will, or a mentor might be a better way of looking at it, right? And so he's been meeting with us and just talking with us. And we've been able, he's been kind of a sounding board, and we've been able to kind of talk with him and process through some things. He's given some really godly sound advice. Some of it's just been real practical stuff. Right, but we've been meeting with him on a regular basis. And so much of the changes that are already taking place and that are going to continue to take place, much of what I'm going to be talking about this morning was influenced by James and just kind of that mentorship and that partnership that we found with him and with Anchor Church. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, when I was out those 2 weeks, one of those weeks I went and visited Anchor Church just because I wanted to check out one of their Sunday services. So I went and checked it out, and that was a lot of fun, right? And so we've kind of had this kind of friendship built with them, and it's been incredibly helpful. Just the wealth of wisdom and everything that's come out of that relationship has already been just phenomenal. And so we've been excited about that, and we're going to continue to meet with him over the next months and hopefully years to come. And so this shift in my heart, right, this kind of new vision and passion that I've been experiencing, I'm not the only one that's been experiencing this. Because I've had conversations with some of you, Chase has had conversations with some of you, and you've expressed the same thing. Right? There's been some of you that have said, I'm not quite sure what it is. Right? I can't quite put my finger on it, but there just seems to be something different about this church. Right? Something's changing, and you can't quite figure out what it is. Right? And so I think many of us are starting to kind of feel this shift. Right, where before there was just this frustration and disappointment. There was this feeling of is this church going anywhere? Is this church dead? Right? Am I on a sinking ship? Right? I think that was the feeling that many of us shared in the past, but many of you are already feeling this shift. You're already seeing there's something changing. The winds are changing, right? And many of you are experiencing that as well, and it's been pretty awesome to see. And I tell you that anything that you've experienced or seen is really just the tip of the iceberg, right? It's just really the tip of the iceberg. 90% of what's going on is kind of beneath the surface and behind the scenes. I'm going to talk about some of that with you this morning, but it's been pretty amazing. So over the last 6 months, I want to talk about 3 of the biggest things that have happened. I could spend 3 or 4 hours just going over all the details of everything that's been taking place, but I won't do that to you. So I'm just going to give you 3 of kind of the biggest changes or biggest things that have happened in the last 6 months to bring us where we are today. Number 1, we have started implementing quarterly goals. So each quarter of the year, we're having something that we're intently focused on as a church and as an organization. And so quarter 2, which is now coming to an end, and this is the last Sunday of quarter 2. And so quarter 2, our goal was organization and professionalism, right? We wanted to re-examine every aspect of this church and consider how can we become more organized and how can we become more professional, right? And so a lot of what's been taking place has just been a lot of internal work, right? Among the staff and the leadership, there's just been a lot of internal work. And we've been looking at every aspect of everything from how everything's run on a Sunday morning to just things throughout the week, behind the scenes, everything you can imagine, things that we didn't even think of, right? We've been just scrutinizing and examining every little detail of this church and figuring out how can we become more organized and how can we become more professional, right? And what I mean by more professional is I'm not saying that we're going to we're never going to be goofy because, I mean, look at how I'm dressed this morning, right? I'm not saying that we're always going to be serious, but just that we're going to take this a bit more seriously, right? Not saying that we're never going to have fun, but we're just going to, this is going to be a legit operation, right? This is a real church, and we want people to take us seriously, and we want God to take us seriously. Again, it goes back to if we want God to trust us with more, we got to be faithful with what He's already given us. Right? God will never give us more if we can't even handle the little tiny church that God's given us. Right? And so this has been just a huge focus over the last 3 months, is just becoming more organized and more professional. And to be honest, it's been really boring, at least to me, because I'm not a very organized or professional person, so it's been hard, but it's been good, right? There's been a lot of fruit that's come out of it, and just because quarter 2 is ending doesn't mean that organization and professionalism is over, right? We still have a lot of work to do. We're going to continue working on it and hopefully continuing to improve. But we're just really laying that foundation, right? Because again, if we want God to grow this church, if we want God to trust us with more, we need to have systems and policies and procedures and all that boring stuff in place in order to be able to steward it well, right? And so this has been a huge focus. Just again, a lot of it's just been behind the scenes taking place, just becoming more organized and professional. The second thing that has happened and that we've implemented in the last 6 months is action groups, right? In fact, we kicked action groups off exactly 6 months ago. This is something new that we've started as a church, an opportunity to build community and relationships. In fact, I want to give a shout out to Phil. He, in our action group, because I go to action group, right? I don't ask anyone to do anything that I don't do myself, right? And so I go to action group on Thursday nights. And in our action group, Phil pointed out how cool it is that 80 to 90% of our congregation is actively involved in an action group. And that's a really, really awesome thing. We're a small church, but still 80, 90% of our congregation is actively plugged into an action group. That is amazing. And what's really cool about that is if we can continue to cultivate that culture as our church grows, to have that level of commitment, to have that level of community that's being developed is an incredible thing, right? In fact, we want 100%. Right, we're not even satisfied with 90. Our goal is 100%. We want 100% of our church plugged into an action group, because action groups are the lifeblood of our church. Right, action groups are where community and relationships going to be formed. Because I've said it 1,000 times before that showing up to church for an hour on Sunday is never enough. And we want you to come to church on Sunday. The Sunday gathering is an important part of what we're doing here. It's awesome, but you'll never be able to form the relationships that you do on Sunday morning or you'll never be able to form the relationships that you do in something like an action group on Sunday morning, right? The hour passing interaction is never enough. And we're seeing, in the last 6 months, we're seeing deeper community and relationship forming in this church. Prior to 6 months ago, we didn't have action groups. All we had was the Sunday gathering. And our relationships were pretty shallow and surface level, right? Because it was just this interaction, kind of in passing on Sunday. How are you doing, brother? Good, right? Actually, I'm doing terrible, but I'm not going to tell you, right? That's just kind of how Sunday usually goes, right? And so action groups are a great place to develop that community, that relationship, right? As you spend time having fun together, serving together, and you're building those relationships. And we've seen just a greater sense of community among us developing over the past few months in our action groups. It's been awesome. Now, I do understand and realize that action groups need a lot of TLC, right? I mean, they need a lot of tender love and care. They need a lot of help. One of the big things, one of the big focuses and purposes of action groups was to reach out in the community, right? That's why they're called action groups. And we want pretty much the goal is 100% of our outreach as a church will be done through our action groups. And we've had conversations and stuff, but nothing has really gotten started with that. We're aware, and that's going to be changing. It may take a bit more time to get kind of the ball rolling on that and get things implemented well, so be patient with us. But over the next 3 months, I'm getting ahead of myself, but in the next quarter and beyond, we're going to really be paying a lot of attention to action groups, making action groups even better than they already are. Because again, the two purposes of action groups, at least the way I understand and see it, is that we want action groups to be a place where you build community, and we want action groups to be where we reach out into the community, into the city, right? And so we want to pay greater attention to that and really work on how can we accomplish that mission in our action groups. So action groups will be, there will be a lot of changes being implemented. We're going to be working hard to make action groups even better than they already are. But like I said, we've already seen in the past few months just this greater sense of community developing and building among us, and it's been awesome to see. And then the third thing that we've implemented in the last few months is what we call the action team. What is the action team? Well, it's basically our volunteer base, except that we don't have volunteers here at the Verb Church. I don't know if you know this, but we don't have volunteers. We have what we call action takers, right? And so this is kind of a new thing that we've implemented recently. We kind of rebranded our volunteers as action takers because volunteer just sounds really boring, right? It just sounds kind of obligatory, right? I'm a volunteer. Gotta volunteer at the church, put in my duty, and go home, right? That's just boring. We don't want that. So we now call them action takers, right? And so you're going to hear that lingo a lot more. When someone refers to action takers, that's essentially what we're referring to, right? It's those who show up each week and they serve. They give up their time. They make this thing happen, right? Week after week after week. And I want to say a big shout out and just a thank you to all of our action takers, our official action takers. You know who you are. It's most of you in this room. It's another awesome thing. Probably 80 to 90% of our church are action takers. And we want to go for 100%, right? That's our goal. We want everyone. A great way that James, our mentor, explains is you want to shift people from being a consumer to being a contributor. Right? And that's what we want here. We don't want people just showing up being consumers or being spectators. We want everybody to be contributors to what God's doing here, right? Plugging into action groups and plugging into the action team, becoming an action taker, right? We want 100% of everyone here being contributors to what God's doing. And so I want to say thank you to all of our action takers. You guys, you are awesome. Most of you are here every week. Some of you get here as early as 8 a.m. to set up, and you're here till sometimes as late as 1 p.m. So you're giving up a good chunk of your Sunday to serve this body, and it does not go unnoticed. It's incredible what you do. I mentioned last week that I took my 2 weeks off, and I wasn't worried about what was happening here because I knew that our action takers had it, and they did an incredible job. You guys make this happen week after week. It's incredible. And we've seen just a shift even in our action takers, right? Our volunteer base. We've seen this shift because before the attitude was kind of this, let's all come in and just do the bare minimum, All right, we're going to show up on, and this was my attitude too. So again, I'm not pointing blame. This was just our attitude, right? This was kind of the culture of the church. Let's come in and do the bare minimum just to get by and go home, right? That was just kind of the sense that everyone seemed to have. And we've seen this shift, right? Just in the past few months, there's been this new energy and excitement. Like people want to be here. People want to serve. People want to make this thing happen week after week. And it's not out of obligation or duty. It's out of excitement and passion. And that's been really, really awesome to see that shift over the last few months. And I'm excited to see what's ahead, right? And so that brings me to, where are we headed? Right? And so this has kind of been the last 6 months and again, I could spend hours just getting into all the details of everything that's happened the last few months. But this is just kind of the overview of the last 6 months, right? And where God's brought us to today. But ultimately, where are we headed as a church? Right? Where are we going from here? I mentioned that our Q2 goal was organization and professionalism. Right, Q2 is ending. We're about to move into Q3. So what is our Q3 goal? Well, I'm glad you asked. Our Q3 goal is to figure out a process of assimilation. And so this is what I mean by that. We want to figure out a way to take someone from a first-time visitor all the way to a committed, plugged-in member of our church. Because what we've seen happening in the past is that occasionally we'll get visitors, but they usually don't come back. And if they do come back, they end up falling through the cracks. So we want to close the back door of the church, so to speak, right? We want to close that back door. We want people, when they show up, not only coming back, but we want them plugging in, right? We want them plugging into what God's doing here, not just being a consumer, but being a contributor, right? And so this is everything from making a good first impression, because it's kind of like a first date, right? If you don't make a good first impression, you ain't getting a second date, right? And so when we have visitors show up, we want to make a good first impression so that they want to come back, right? So that we get that second date, so to speak. So we're going to be working hard over the next few months on hospitality, our first impressions, greeters, that sort of thing. Like we want to make a really good first impression. We don't want to be awkward and weird. We don't want to scare people off, right? And organization and professionalism is going to be playing a huge part in helping that out, right? So that when people walk in here, they're like, man, this is a legit church, right? And so that's what we want. We want to make that good first impression. We want a really good, solid follow-up with people that's not creepy or awkward, but we just want a good follow-up with people. And then, of course, ultimately, we're wanting to plug people into action groups, into the action team, right? And that's really what assimilation's all about, is not only getting people coming back. I mean, that's great. We want people coming back, but we want people plugging in to action groups, into the action team, right? That's what it's all about. Our mission here is to be followers of Jesus through worship, community, and service, right? Worship is accomplished in our Sunday morning gathering. Community is accomplished in our action groups. Service is accomplished in our action team. And that's our church in a nutshell, right? It's simple, it's elegant and sleek, right? That's it, right? Show up on Sunday morning, join an action group, join the action team. And that's what we want people to do, right? When they come here, we don't want them just attending on Sunday. We want them plugging in all the way. And that's what we're going to be looking at over the next few months, putting that process in so that people don't fall through the cracks, right? And then if that's our Q3 goal, then what is our Q4 goal? Q4 begins in October. So what will our Q4 goal be? Well, simply put, Q4, we're going to be focusing on growth. So in the next 3 months, we're not even concerned or worried or focused on church growth until Q4. Right? We're not even going to be concerned about it. We're not going to be working on it. We're not even going to be thinking much about church growth until Q4. Now, some of you might be thinking, wait, what? Like, we're not going to be trying to grow this church for another 3 months? Right? It seems very counterintuitive, right? Because again, I mean, there's this sense of many of you have expressed the concern of like, this church isn't growing. Is this church dead? Like, what's going on, right? And so some of you might be thinking, man, that's really counterintuitive, right? We need growth now. You're telling me that you're not even going to be thinking about it until October? Well, let me explain it this way. Right now, what's happening is that we are just getting the soil ready. Right, that's basically what we're doing, right? We're getting the soil ready. We're pulling out all of the rocks and the weeds and the thorns, right? We're tilling the ground. We're fertilizing, right? We're getting the soil ready and we're getting it healthy. That's essentially what we've been doing over the past few months. That's what we're going to be doing over the next few months. We're just getting the soil ready so that in quarter 4, we can begin to plant seeds. And as we begin to plant seeds into healthy soil, we're going to believe God for an incredible harvest to come. Right? But we can't expect that harvest to come if the soil isn't healthy. Right? How do we expect a harvest to come if our soil isn't ready? And essentially in the past, we had very unhealthy soil, if I were to be honest with you. Right? We had very unhealthy soil, and this is why we would see those seeds planted, right? We would see visitors come, and people just weren't sticking around, right? That people weren't taking root because our soil was unhealthy. And so we've been working hard on getting that ground ready, right? Getting the soil healthy so that in quarter 4 we can begin to plant seeds. And we're believing God, starting in October and beyond, God's going to bring an incredible harvest. Right? But we need to be ready for it. Right? We can't expect a harvest if the soil is unhealthy. We can't expect God to give us more if we're not faithful with the little that he's already given us. And so that's what we're working on. This is why we're not focused on church growth for a few more months, because we got a lot of work to do. And we just have a lot of work to do because we're not ready. Right? And so we're getting the ground ready. We're getting the soil ready for God to bring a harvest. And I'm telling you, church, we are on the brink of a major harvest. We really are. And if you remember back almost 2 years ago now when we moved into this location, there was this sense of excitement, right? And I remember telling you guys that I felt like we were on the brink of something awesome. Right, and it was an incredible season in the life of our church, just how God was opening doors and providing for us supernaturally, and it was an incredible season watching God work to get us into this building. And I remember there was this sense of we're on the brink of something awesome, right? God's going to do something incredible, right? And then we moved into this location, and then nothing really seemed to happen. Right? And I think that's a reason why many of us, including myself, have felt so just frustrated and disappointed. Because for 5 years now, I have felt that God has something awesome in store for this church. Right? That God has something incredible waiting for us. And we've always felt on the brink, but never able to quite get there. Right? And I feel now more than ever that we are on the brink of an incredible harvest. And God is just waiting to give it to us. We just have to be ready to receive it. Right? God has an incredible harvest waiting for us, and we need to be ready to receive it. And that's what we're working on. Right? We're getting the soil ready so that in quarter 4, we can see an incredible harvest. The best is truly yet to come. Right? The best is truly yet to come. God has something awesome. God has taken us somewhere, and jump on board or get left behind. Right? I mean, that's basically what it comes down to, is that God has taken us somewhere, and if you're not plugged in and committed yet, jump on board. Right? Because with or without you, we're headed somewhere awesome. Right? And now is a great time to jump on board. And so what should you do? Right? What ultimately should you do to help us get ready for where God's taken us? Well, simply put, number 1, join an action group if you haven't yet. And I realize that we've only got 2 action groups currently, so we don't have a lot of options. It may be kind of difficult for you to join one, but do whatever you can. If you're not plugged into an action group, join an action group. Because again, I mean, that's the lifeblood of our church. The heartbeat of our church is action groups. Right? If you want to build relationships with others, and if you want to reach out into the community, action groups are where it's at. Right? So plug into an action group. And then number 2, join the action team. If you haven't yet, if you're not an action taker, become an action taker. Right? Don't just be a consumer, be a contributor. Right? How awesome would it be to be a contributor, to be a part of the harvest that's coming for us? Right? Don't just be sitting on the sidelines watching it. Be a part of what God has ready for us. So join the action team if you haven't yet. And then thirdly, and probably the most important, is pray. right? Pray. Over the next few months, we need people just committed to praying for this church. The Bible says that, Paul writes that one plants and another waters, but God's the one that gives the increase. Right, so all this work that we're doing, right, the organization and professionalism and the processes of assimilation, all this work that we're doing is great and it's important. But it means nothing unless God ultimately brings the increase. Right, because we can get the soil ready and we can plant the seeds, but it's ultimately up to God whether He brings in the harvest. Right, and so we got to pray. We just got to pray and believe God that He's going to bring the harvest that He's promised us, right? That He's going to bring the growth that He has for us and that we'll be ready to receive it, right? And so pray. Commit to praying every day, if you can remember, over the next few months. Pray for me, pray for the leadership of this church, and pray for every one of us, right? And just pray that we will be ready to receive the harvest that God has for us. Now, if you have any questions about what I've shared with you this morning, because I know I covered a lot, and there's really much more that I could share with you. Hours and hours I could just talk about all that's been happening and all that God's doing and just kind of the vision that we see ahead for us. But come talk to us. Right, and I've told you that a lot of what's happening is kind of behind the scenes, and it's not because we're keeping anything from you. It's just the nature of how it is. Right, there's just a lot of internal work happening, but we're definitely an open book. So any questions you have, if you want to know more, come see either myself after service, see Chase. See Pastor Megan, or see Stephanie. She's in the back. I don't know if you know, she's our official church coordinator, we call her. So she cracks the whip and makes sure that everything's running smooth. And she's been a big influential part in especially getting us organized and professional. So she's played a big part in that. And so any of the four of us, myself, Chase, Megan, or Stephanie, come see us. One of us will know the answer, right? If you ask us a question and we don't know, we'll just pass you on to someone else. But surely between the four of us, one of us will know the answer. But we would love to answer any questions you have. If you want to know more, maybe you just have a word of encouragement. Maybe you have concerns. Whatever it is, come see us. We would love to talk to you more about all this. But in short, guys, I'm telling you that God has something in store for us. It's going to be incredible. It's just, I can't explain it, but I've never been this excited about what God's doing here than I am today. And we're on the brink of something awesome, and we're getting ready. Right, I think that's the most exciting part of it all, is that it's always been available to us, but finally we're getting ready to receive what God has for us, and I'm excited. I'm excited to see where God's going to take us over the next 6 years, or over the next 6 months, and over the next 6 years, and just beyond. Right, it's going to be awesome, and I'm excited to have you on the journey with us. So let's pray. God, we thank you that you are the head of this church, that you have all authority, God, and that you have something incredible waiting for us, God. You have a harvest that you're wanting to bring to us of broken, lost people, of people who need a home, God, and you're going to bring these people to us, God. But first, we need to get the soil ready. And I thank you, Lord, that your word promises that if we're faithful in the little, you're going to trust us with more. And we lay hold of that promise. And we're putting in the work. We're being diligent and intentional about getting the soil ready, becoming faithful servants of what you've given us so that you'll trust us with more. And so, God, we thank you for that. We rejoice in it. We lay hold of your promise. And we ask you, Lord, to trust us with more. God, bring in the harvest that you have for us. Let this church be all and more that you've promised that we would be. So God, we thank you. We rejoice. It's in your name. Amen.